So my name's Kim Lissarrague. I make guitars. I've been making guitars since I was 13 years old, so that's about 18 years now. Self-taught with a bit of help along the way from Peter Biffen, who's a well-known guitar maker. Well, this is the first acoustic guitar I ever made. I was about 15, I'd made a few electric guitars and I thought, alright, it's time to make an acoustic guitar. So I made this one, the body, out of some old plywood from an old cupboard, and the fingerboard is a piece of brush box from some old floorboards. So I managed to knock it together, some old parts that I found lying around. That was my first acoustic guitar. I started learning classical guitar when I was about 16, so that was my passion really, to eventually move into classical guitars because they're much more refined. And, yeah, I work fairly quickly, so I learn from each guitar, one guitar to the next. Try a 1/10 of a millimetre off here, a little bit stiffer there, and then you see the results of that, and by the time you've played that guitar, you're incorporating that understanding and that experience into the next one. There's a lot about intuition in guitar making. You can have a particular design, but when it comes to flexing the wood and choosing the bracing and all these different aspects of guitar building, you've really got to come from years of experience and understanding, tapping, listening to different notes and how the wood responds, and then using that experience as almost an intuitive way to how you're going to approach the next instrument. And sometimes it works, sometimes you might come up with an idea that you think will work and it ends up, being fairly ordinary, but you learn from that still and you keep moving on. You know when you've made a good guitar, and you know when you've made a guitar that has problems, when things aren't working 100%. Some people like to draw things and measure things and analyse things, but I get a lot of experience just by making guitars one after the other very quickly and seeing the difference in each instrument and how they change, and developing it from that. I mean, it's not an easy way to make a living making instruments, but because I started so young, I got to spend a lot of time while I was living at my parents' making mistakes and experiencing things that worked and things that didn't work before I had to support myself. And by the time I left high school, I was able to work for shops doing repair work and that sort of thing to pay the bills in between, and slowly every now and then make an instrument to sell, either for a custom order or for a shop to try and sell. But it took a long time before I got to the point where I could just make instruments full time and be able to sell them regularly, because it's one thing to make an instrument, but it's another thing to be able to sell them once you've done that. So these days I make a fairly Australian style classical guitar, and what makes it unique from Spanish style guitars is it's got the arch back, very heavy back and sides, and a much lighter top, and this is aided by the use of carbon fibre bracing, which is a fairly new thing, but it allows the top to be a lot thinner, and that reduction in weight allows the energy to be transferred into the soundboard much more easily, so you do get a little bit more sustain, a little bit more volume, and a little bit more dynamic range and tonal colour, which is what Greg Smallman was looking for when he developed this style of guitar. And a lot of the Australian builders build in this style of guitar these days. So the arched back just gives it a little bit more stiffness, whereas a flat back can have a bit of flex in it, and usually they have braces to stop that happening. But because it's got the arch in it, it creates stiffness by the shape of it, and so then you don't have to put bracing inside the back. So I put an armrest on my guitars now as standard for two reasons. It makes it more comfortable for the player, but it also stops the forearm from dampening the soundboard. Because the soundboard is very thin, especially on the sides, some of the volume can be reduced and can actually change the frequency of the soundboard by the arm resting there as the player plays the instrument. So the armrest improves the tone overall. Well, I like using the Japanese saws because they're very fine cut and they're very sharp, so you can cut quite quickly, and they're a pulling action rather than the old style push saw. The teeth don't last as long because they're very fine, but they're a really nice saw to use.